When all the signs are pointing to economic decline in South Africa, can innovation help prop us up? According to the Global Innovation Index released a few days ago, South Africa is the second most innovative nation in Sub Saharan Africa. However, we rank 60 out of 141 countries globally. We're behind Mauritius, that ranks above 50. The index is a tool that measures innovative performance across the globe. The top spots have basically been static for years. They include Switzerland, the UK, Sweden, Netherlands and the United States. Well, to discuss, we're now joined by the Chief Economist from the UN agency, the World Intellectual Property Organization, Carsten Fink. He joins us via Skype from Geneva. Great to have you with us, Carsten. WIPO has issued a release saying that Africa has always been innovative, a tradition of innovation and creativity. But do we really have that? We're not doing that well. Mauritius sitting at 49 and we're at 60.
Good evening, and thank you for having me on. It is true, if you look at the ranks, the way we present them, you wouldn't find any African countries among the top 50. Mauritius comes in right at 49th spot. The top performing economies in the Global Innovation Index are all high-income economies, and in a way that's not surprising, given that the more developed economies can draw on more resources to invest in innovation. However, what we also do in the Global Innovation Index, we compare the performance of countries relative to their level of economic development, and on this metric, a number of African economies turn out to perform quite well, including South Africa.
Okay, and there Mozambique, Malawi, Rwanda also doing well. So this is when we look at low income versus low income, like versus like.
That's correct. And indeed, the countries you mentioned in many ways show innovation performance that's quite comparable to many of the middle income economies that are included in our index.
Mauritius is attracting investment. It's attracting wealth with tax breaks. Is it using its, and this is quite a broad question, but is it using its geography innovatively as well? Because Mauritius, South Africa, we both want to be this gateway into the rest of Africa.
Well, it's, of course, and you mentioned that at the outset, always quite difficult to compare economies that are made up differently. And in the case of Mauritius, we're talking about a relatively small island economy, which is quite different to an economy like South Africa that has a completely different industrial structure. What we do in our Global Innovation Index is we look at the comparative strengths and weaknesses. And indeed, if you make this comparison between Mauritius and South Africa, it turns out that these economies have rather different strengths and weaknesses.
Tell me a bit more about South Africa and about this link between innovation and economic growth, because we desperately need economic growth.
Yes, and I believe innovation has an important role to play. I think it's important for economies at any stage of development to take innovation seriously, which on the one hand means investing in the various pillars of the innovation system, which means investing in money in education, in research, and the infrastructure that supports innovation. But what we've also learned, which is quite important, is to be patient and perseverance. Innovation doesn't happen overnight. It takes long-term commitment and it takes a stable and predictable policy framework.
Education is key. You've just mentioned a policy framework. Are those the main ways that we can foster innovation?
That's correct. And interestingly, South Africa shows a mixed performance on innovation. If you look at the various education indicators that we have in the Global Innovation Index, South Africa performs quite well as far as spending on education is concerned, but looking at the tertiary education system, compared to other countries, there South Africa shows some weaknesses in terms of enrollment and other indicators.
Yeah, this is something we fret about, getting bang for our buck when it comes to education spending. Carsten, is this a lead indicator when it comes to future economic growth, if we look at innovation? Because China is sitting at 42, while the US and the UK are right at the top, although China, some would say, did very well without being very innovative for a long time.
Well, I think one should be cautious. Certainly the ranking in the Global Innovation Index is not the predictor of tomorrow's growth. And there are many other factors that determine growth performance in the short term. For many African countries, commodity prices play an important role in the short term. But it's important when thinking about innovation that this is what is really sustaining economic growth in the long term. And it's not only the ideas, the new technologies that you come up with in your own economy. It's also your whole engagement with the global economy, the kind of technologies you import, the kind of technologies you absorb from other countries. And this is really what sort of generates the productivity gains that sustain economic growth in the long run.
Carsten, final question for you. Later this year, African heads of state, ministers, officials from the UN, from your agency and the AU will gather to look at boosting the uptake of intellectual property tools. Why should we be interested so much in intellectual property?
I'm glad you mentioned this. We're very pleased to co-host a ministerial meeting together with the African Union and the government of Senegal. I would very simply put it that intellectual property is not a sufficient condition for innovation to happen and to yield benefits, but it is a necessary condition. Economies invest more and more resources in tangible assets. And intellectual property is the means by which businesses and economies as a whole generate a return on those investments. So it is quite relevant for countries throughout Africa.
And we'll follow that in November. Thank you very much for your time, Carsten Fink from the World Intellectual Property Organization.